Um, okay, let's begin. So, hello everyone. Welcome to Attitudinal Healing International's webinar series called Attitudinal Healing Around the World. Today, it's our great pleasure to welcome Phoebe Lauren. Phoebe is a dear friend of mine and has been associated with attitudinal healing for more than 30 years. She's served as the executive director of the Founding Center in Tiburon, as well as in Sausalito another time, and also started a center in Canada many years ago. Phoebe now lives in France, and she's a prolific author. She's written more than 20 books, does workshops and lecturing, and just supports people in many ways using attitudinal healing and A Course in Miracles, which she's also studied for many, many years. Today, we're fortunate to have Phoebe share with us her experiences in using attitudinal healing to help heal grief and loss. So Phoebe, welcome. We're so happy to have you.
Well, thank you, Trish. In fact, you took away some of the material that I was going to share, so
Oh, I'm
we'll move
sorry.
no, that's
You
good.
can repeat it. It's okay.
Thank you so much, Trish, because this is the first time I've ever done a webinar. And thanks to you, we have some pretty interesting slides to show with nice graphics, which I was just incapable of making. So thank you very much for inviting me and for helping me get this webinar off the ground. And also thank you for those of you that are listening. I'm going to try to speak slowly because some of you, this is not your first language, English, and we will see how that goes. I would ask all of you that are actually listening at this moment if you would have with you a piece of paper and a pen, because we will be doing one small, short written exercise. So I'm hoping everybody has that. I don't know how I would know if they did or not, but we'll just move forward. Trish has already introduced me, and I think the only thing that I might like to add is that I've done workshops in French in Switzerland and a few in France, and that now I volunteer at the Center for Women's Rights, doing counseling and listening to individual women using attitudinal healing. I work in French. There's no center in France at the moment, although I wish there would be. So I'm just the contact person for France. I think that's about what you need to know. The ideas that I'm going to be presenting are the ones that I've written about in a book called Space Between the Colors. That's what you see on the screen right now. The ideas and my experience, especially the principles, have had a tremendous impact on my life. This book, Space Between the Colors, was written after the death of my only child. And I wrote it specifically to help parents and to help people that were supporting parents who have lost a child. The ideas, based on attitudinal healing, of course, can be used in any situation of loss, also for therapists, for families, and for friends. The main message of the presentation is that you can always choose to be peaceful, and that maybe you can even choose to be happy, no matter what is happening around us. And that's a very important aspect of the presentation, is that you always have a choice as to how you're going to look at life and how you're going to look at a situation. I'm going to be telling you about the stages of grieving as I see them, and reinforcing each stage with specific principles of attitudinal healing that have helped me and have helped other people. At the end, there will be a question and answer period. I see that there are 3 people online at the moment, so if you have questions, I will be happy to address them. And if not, well, I might just add something special for the 3 of you. Who knows? Now, you will see in front of you a little girl, and she has her hands out. I don't know exactly what's in her hands. I tried to enlarge to see what was there, and I couldn't. But the image to me represents the idea of a child and the gift and love that a child can bring into our lives, no matter how long they live. And that the love that that little girl is offering, it never goes away, no matter what. So we're able to see when somebody does die that we can address the loss of it, or we can also see it as a gift. It's up to us. So my son lived for 10 years. I can look at it and think, oh, what a great loss that he only lived that long. Or I can look at his life and think, what a tremendous gift it was. And at this point in my life, surely that's the way I look at it. So to start with, you see the title Space Between the Colors, and you might wonder, what does that mean exactly? Well, I have been painting for a number of years, and I like to think of the empty canvas as life, and then the colors that I add to the canvas are the interesting experiences that I have, that they are my children, my child in this case, or anything that I've experienced directly. But of course, when we paint, there's always that space between the colors. There's that empty space. And I've written a poem explaining exactly what I mean by space between the colors. So I'm going to read that to you now from my book. Space between the colors. They come in so innocent, striving to be free. The lives they lead are shortened by events we cannot see. We focus on the loss, pain, the terror in disbelief. Memories flood our minds, colored by life, love, and sometimes relief. We put away the happy times, the sadness and the sorrow, like vivid colors in a painting, which fade into one more tomorrow. Now we are left with space, large and clean, no longer with the colors of children, now unseen. We look to the space in between the colors for life's secret ways to find the answers needed for transformation and happier days. That was written very early on in my grieving period. So as I see it, there's 7 different stages of grieving. And even though I'm going to present them in chronological order, it doesn't mean that they are actually linear, as in if I complete stage 1, then I will be able to go on to stage 2, because grief is a circle and it goes around and around. So we may feel that we've moved on from the first stage of grieving, but later on we may find ourselves back there once again. So not to be discouraged. It's just how grief unfolds. So let me go now to the first the first slide that you see up there are the principles of attitudinal healing. I don't know if everybody who's watching this presentation is aware of the different principles. I'm showing it now to you in its entirety, all 12 principles, but later on I will be using just certain ones, pointing out certain ones that were helpful to me or that could be helpful to you. One of the main principles that I use a lot in grief work is principle number 1, that the essence of our being is love. Because we can find that if we believe that is true, that love never dies, it lessens the sting of a death, let's say. And another one that I love to use, and it's been one of my favorites, I'll just point it out now and then later tell you how I've been using it, is number 8, that we can choose and direct ourselves to be peaceful inside, regardless of what is happening outside. And that's not just when we're grieving or when we're facing a loss, but that can be used in every circumstance in life. Anytime there's something difficult, we can just turn and pull up that number 8. It's one that's been with me for a very, very long time. And the other one that I like very much is number 10. We can focus on the whole of life rather than the fragments. That one has saved me many, many times because I tend, like most people, when I have a problem, I look at the problem and it just grows in size. And now, with that principle number 10, I have learned over the years, because I've been involved with attitudinal healing for so long, I have learned that no matter what the problem is, there's always the whole of life. There's an array of events and things that are happening, and I can look at the whole of life and I can see wonderful things happening at the same time that I could be grieving the death of somebody or of something. So, what happens during the first week when somebody dies, especially somebody close, especially a child? We move into this idea of we cannot believe that this is happening to us. And we don't know what to do. We're lost. It's as if we are in a fog. Like there's a film that's out there, but I'm not part of it. I'm completely detached, completely in shock and disbelief. During that period, I can remember the memorial service for my son. I can remember the day that the sun was shining. It was a crisp day. I felt very peaceful, very still. Of course, I was totally in shock and detached. I remembered that I delivered a very eloquent speech. I compared his life to a beautiful song. And I pointed out that in a beautiful song, when we listen to a song and it's over, we don't think that it could have been more beautiful had it lasted longer. And I related that directly to his life and to his death. Now, to be able to do that, I had to be in shock because it would have been impossible to do it if I really knew exactly what was going on. So I was in I can't believe it state at that point.
Phoebe?
Loss. And it's as if we cannot absorb a loss so great as the loss of a child or somebody very close to us. And so the brain kind of shuts down and gives us this period of disbelief. I can remember waking up in the mornings, and every morning I had to wake up again and repeat in my mind and realize that my son was gone. It's simply a period where we cannot feel what has happened, and that we know that the impossible has happened, but yet it remains and must remain impossible for a period of time until we can gradually start to accept it. So I remember brushing my teeth, for example, and it felt like an hour, it felt like 10 minutes went by or 5 minutes, and actually an hour had gone by. So that's the thing that most people describe in this first period, a feeling of unreality, a feeling of loss of time, not realizing, not tracking time, etc. The grief process deals with and hits us on all levels. So it affects our lives physically, socially, spiritually, emotionally, and certainly mentally. When a shock, very big shock arrives, certainly we feel as if we are in the twilight zone. Now, there's no right way to grieve, and that's really important to tell you that you can only grieve however you can grieve, and there's no length of time, so don't believe somebody who tells you that it should only last this long or that long. It takes as long as it takes. I do want to tell you something that I forgot to tell you. Why did I write this book? Mainly because there wasn't a book out that said that you can grieve in your own way and grieve in your own time. And I felt that it was very important. The subtitle is How to Grieve After My Child Has Died. I felt that it was very important. This question is being asked by parents all over the world. How can you go on? How can you continue with life? How can you allow yourself to be open and vulnerable again, to love again? And not only that, but how can you continue to live without your child or without your loved one and live with gusto and live with happiness? How do you turn lemon, in fact, into lemonade? And that's my whole idea in the book. So we've been dealt a hand. How can we deal with it in the best way possible? So one father told me that he felt after the death of his child that he was at the end of a chapter in the book, and all he had to do was turn the page and continue on. Now, people do this in the shock and disbelief time. They just turn the page, believe that they can continue on without changing anything. So whatever we're unwilling to look at today, it will be there for tomorrow. So if you try antidepressants, for example, I did try that one time, and I found that it just pushed away the situation, and I knew I would have to look at it again. Some of the symptoms in this period of shock and disbelief are changes in your eating patterns, changing in your sleeping patterns, sighing a lot, not exercising, being short of breath, feeling a tightness in your chest or in your scalp or in your throat. And you may be experiencing general anxiety. You have panic attacks, for instance. I relate the loss of a child, the death of a child, or the death of somebody really close to you, like a major earthquake, a 10.0 earthquake on the Richter scale. So we're shaken up, we're shaken to our roots. And afterwards, the shock period is, well, I have survived the earthquake. I'm still here. And then there's the aftershocks that come, and they always do come. We, as human beings, are totally unprepared by our society, at least the societies that I know, to deal with death and to know what to expect. So some helpful hints during this first period are to be gentle with yourself and to be extra careful, for instance, when you're using machinery, when you're driving, because you're not fully present. To carefully plan your activities, to watch what kinds of movies that you see. If people invite you, somebody invited me to see the musical play Evita, where there was a death scene. And had I known that, I would not have gone. So for many years, I was very careful about what movies I saw. I was careful about what books I read. And also to choose your friends carefully, because everyone thinks that they know exactly what you need and what you need to do. And that's simply not the case. We have to do what we feel is right for us. And for each person, loss is different. And so we have friends that are advising us all the time. They're probably not the best friends to be around. All the hints that I give you are hints that work and worked for me, and they work for other people. But of course, you're free to say, yes, that's a good idea, or I don't really feel that that's important to me. The thing is, this is not an ordinary time, so don't expect it to be. That seems very simple, but yet most people think, well, it's an ordinary time in a way, life goes on, but it is not an ordinary period for you. And that's important to know that. And also to set up a good support system. I will tell you what worked for me. I was in law school at the time, and my mother came every week, and she had lunch with me in a restaurant. She just listened to whatever I wanted to talk about, whether it was classes at school or relationships, whatever. I also had a weekly therapy appointment, and I had a weekly share kind of appointment with the medical doctor who took care of our son at the end of his life. So I had 3 very strong support systems in place. Maybe you don't need that, but I knew myself well enough to know that the only way it would be even in any way possible for me to get through this tremendous loss would be to have good support. And I really needed it. So I planned it for myself. I say, do anything that helps you get through this period. I like to connect, for instance, with nature. Somebody else might like music. Whatever it is, please consider doing it for your own benefit. And lastly, don't make important decisions. At least that's what I always talk to people about. I can't say do not make important decisions, but I have seen that families and parents who have made important decisions, like moving to another house, moving to another town, or whatever, very often afterwards they regret it. It seems during the shock period, it's the time to just be in shock, to really be in disbelief. And so probably not the best time to make decisions. Of course, again, it's up to you. The principle that I use during this period, I didn't use it myself because I wasn't aware of attitudinal healing at the time that my son died. But I think health is inner peace is so important. Just to know that somewhere out there I can be peaceful and that I can ride through this, that I can get through it, that someday, I don't know when, but I could choose somewhere to be peaceful. And that was very helpful for me. The second stage, and I always put down the stage and then some words that sort of epitomize that stage. Second stage I call disorganization, the roller coaster. Imagine after this shock, it's as if you're riding on a roller coaster in the dark. So you don't know where the next turn is. You don't know where the next dip is coming. So in this period of disorganization where you're losing or have lost your identity, for instance, I lost my identity as a mother since I only had the one child. It's a period where there's these moments where the roller coaster is going along and I would think, yes, I can do this. It'll be okay. And then boom, the roller coaster goes down. And there I am lost again. And then it goes up. And so it's tremendous swings of emotions, tremendous swings mentally, very difficult to deal with in this period. But the blessing of that's the thing, the blessing of the numbness of the shock starts to wear off after some weeks, some days, just depends on the person. And so one moment I can cope, the next moment I'm totally lost. This period can last a very long time. And please don't believe anybody that says grief is limited in time. The first book I read after the death of Marcus said, after 1 year, you will feel better. After 1 year, I tell you, I did not feel better. So I went to the bookstore and I got another book that said after 2 years, I would feel better. I can tell you, after 2 years, I didn't feel better. I was more able to cope. But it wasn't something that just went 1 year, 2 years, and afterwards, okay, get on with life. It didn't work that way for me. I found out that I was still grieving after 2 years and after all the books told me how I should feel. And that made me feel frustrated, like I didn't do it right. I was a failure at grieving. And it was very difficult for me to accept that until one day I said, wait a minute, what we really need here is another book. Let's be realistic. And that's when the idea started coming to me. I'm going to write a book and say, hey, it takes as long as it takes. No judgment here. Just whatever length of time it takes, it's okay. And I gave myself, by writing this book, permission to grieve for however many years I needed to grieve for. Most of the people do seem to do a great deal of grieving in the first year or two. I admit that. But some of us, I'm a slow person to integrate everything, let's say. It took me longer. Some people can go on as if nothing has happened. This I did as a child, and I found that how I dealt with loss as an adult was directly related to how I dealt with loss as a child. My father was one of 12 children and one of the youngest, and so I saw a lot of my aunts and my uncles die. At 8 years old, I had a little brother that died. At 10 years old, I had my favorite cousin that died. And what I learned from that was no one talked about it. No one. My mother and father didn't talk about it. My brother Jimmy was dead. It was as if he never existed. And so I went on with my life thinking that was the way to deal with death, with loss. Just go on, just go on until this major loss, big loss is what I call it, when Marcus died. And then I couldn't go on any further. My defense system was just blown apart, and I had to learn another way to deal with it. So we know that loss occurs as long as we're alive, because change occurs as long as we're alive. That means every change that comes to us, there's a loss. And even if it's an improvement, a new house, a new job, a better relationship, we're still losing the one that we had. It's like a trapeze artist. He can't just rest on one swing and think he's going to grab the other. He has to let go. So there's loss continuously through our lives. And I'm sure you can think of many, many losses that you've already experienced. Little losses, big losses, whatever. It's just part of the game of life. During this period of up and down, you may start to question your sanctity. And so then you turn to this idea, if only. It's very interesting. If only I hadn't given the keys to my child. If only I had stayed longer at the dinner table. If only I had called someone. If only he had called someone. If only she hadn't done this or had done this. So it's a question that comes into the head. If only, if only, if only. If only someone had done something differently, then and only then my child wouldn't have died. Your friend wouldn't have died. Your relative wouldn't have died. And this can stay with us a very long time. And what are those if onlys? We're coping with disorganization. And what are we trying to do? We're trying to have a different end result than what we have. So if only this happened or that happened, then, and only then, that person would still be alive. And we are also during this period trying to cope with anger, because it's the same thing, anger. If only, and then we blame ourselves, we blame another person. So we're dealing with anger, we're dealing with fear, and we're dealing with guilt. One woman that I know bought a Bobo the Clown. That's a big sort of rubberized clown that has sand in the bottom of it. And she took that clown and would hit it every day, like for 15 minutes before going to work, to help get the anger out. I think you can imagine who that woman was. However, I must say what kept me going was after the death of my son, I pulled the blankets over my head and I said, this is it. This is my Waterloo, which means I'm not going to get out of this. I'm not going to overcome this loss. And there was a little voice inside of me that said, maybe someday you can be happy. And I thought I was really crazy at that point. But that voice was there, and it was very, very faint, but I could still hear it. Maybe someday. And this helped prevent, maybe slightly, sorry, I was just saying a word in French. This helped me slightly. But what really helped me was my ex-husband. I had the blanket over my head. My son Marcus died at the end of my second year of law school, so I hadn't finished the second year, and I had to do and wanted to do the third year at the same time as finishing the second year. And he picked me up out of bed, threw me in the shower, washed my hair, gave me clothes, and he had made an appointment with the dean of law school. And I went and I explained to him that I needed to complete with my class. And in fact, I did, using the coping technique that I had used as a child, which is just go and keep going. And it worked pretty well, except when I got home from law school, of course. At that time, I became acquainted with Jerry Jampolsky's work, and I read the book Teach Only Love. This book saved my life. It was the most important book I had read up to that point. His words taught me to have courage and to know that anything is possible. I read about the challenges that other people had had and overcome, and I knew then that it was also possible for me. And let's see, what else am I going to tell you? So in this period, like in all periods, you must do whatever it is that you need to do to get through what's happening to you. One thing, if you find yourself during this period of disorganization being very calm and not feeling anything at all, as if, yes, well, my child died, my mother died, my sister died, but I can just go on with life. That's probably a good time to start looking around for some resources, for some help, because it's not normal to not have this sort of up and down period. One of the most difficult things is the sudden death of a person, especially a child, who left home in a state of anger, perhaps, and someone that you didn't get to say goodbye to. I have learned from other people's experiences that I never know when the last time something will happen in my life. I never knew when I was experiencing it, is what I'm saying. So I didn't know that I would only have one child. I didn't know that I might say goodbye to somebody and never see them again. And so other people told me through their experiences how important it is to really say goodbye, to really remember to leave as much as possible with loving thoughts and loving words, because what? We never know. This part of grieving is characterized by confusion, disorganization, of course, the lack of the ability to focus, forgetfulness, exhaustion, the fear of inappropriate behavior, like you want to kill somebody. Of course, you don't act on that. And the fear of going crazy. Some of the practical ways of dealing with it are trying to have a routine in place, things that you have to do each day, and to take care of yourself, to accept yourself as you are, even if your thoughts are pretty strange, to be patient with the disorganization, with the forgetfulness, and maybe to postpone major decisions. That's a choice. Postpone major decisions until you're feeling stronger. Of course, I am a great believer in professional help if needed, or at least attending a grief group, and there are plenty of them. And then also to really try to release that anger that is inside of you. Now what I'm going to ask you to do, because I hope you have paper and pencil, it's a very simple exercise and it's very quick. So that's good because time is passing by. You take a piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and just without thinking, just list the first 5 losses that come to you, whatever they are. And then you could raise your hand. I could see if you've done that. Just let me know if you've done that. Just 5 losses, any 5, not necessarily something you're working on. This is an exercise that you can use at home. I don't know if people are actually doing it. I hope so. I hope somebody's doing
So,
it.
Yeah, if you want to raise your hand when you're done, there's a little icon at the top of the screen with a little man holding his hand up. Just click on that, and Phoebe will be able to see that you're complete.
It should be done really quick. I lost this and this and this and this and this. Finished. Maybe nobody's doing it. Give you a minute. I hope I'm not talking too quickly. Yes, good. Okay, well, I'm feeling we'll just continue on. The idea, maybe you'll do this at home. You might just note the exercise if you're not actually doing it right now. That is, as quickly as possible, you list 5 losses that you've experienced. And then just write a sentence or 2 about that loss. And you will be surprised. I wrote about my little dolly stuffed animal that was on my bed when I was like 8 years old. And I had come home from school one day and my mother had thrown it away. This is a very big loss for me, and I didn't even realize that it was. So that is an exercise that you can do to see how do you deal with loss. Something you can do at home anytime. Also, during this period, I found value in collecting affirmations and posting them all over my house, on the mirror, car dashboard, anywhere that I could think of, and repeating them over and over again. An affirmation is a phrase that you say in the present tense, like, every day I am getting better and better. Life is good, something like that. And then just repeating those again and again. Also, during this period, I found that it was very helpful for me to try to put this event in perspective. So I used principle number 10, as I told you, one that I liked very much. I was able to focus on the whole of life and not the fragment. I used that a lot in my life in general, but particularly during this time where I was putting in perspective loss. Okay, the next one we see is reorganization, putting your life back together again. And it's, so now what? So now what? It's a time where you visit the house of broken dreams. You had a life, you had a vision, it didn't work out. Simple. Maybe you wanted to have children, now you find yourself without children. Whatever it is, it's a reorganizing of what you thought your life could be or should be. And during this period, I found myself starting to reorganize, especially after a long, long period of time. I realized that I no longer wanted to not invest in my life. So something inside of me wanted to live and wanted to be happy again. And what I did after many, many years, which was a radical change, I quit my job, I sold my car, and I left and went to live in France. And I did that because that was my new dream. My broken dream was gone. And so I made a new dream. During this time, I went from being a wife and a mother to being a divorced, childless woman in 2 short years. So it takes a lot of adjusting. One moment I was feeding dogs and rabbits and cats and chickens, and the next moment I was living alone with all that time on my hands. I found that there was this space that needed to be filled inside of me. And I decided that one of the best ways to fill it was to love myself, to take care of myself. Now, it's true, I have a life today, which is completely different from the one I ever imagined. And so does everybody else that has experienced a tremendous loss. We have another life, we have a different life. Yet, I'm basically happy with this life. Remember that while you are adjusting to the new life, you are still grieving, and that grieving is a process. One of the things that I did at the Center for Attitudinal Healing was start a group for parents who were grieving the loss of a child. Now, why did I do that? Because I needed to have that group for myself. And one time, a woman shared that after 2 years of not going in her child's room, she went in the room, picked up some papers off the floor, and put a plant in the room. The group members were so sympathetic to this woman, and they were talking to her about how difficult that must have been. Well, I stopped the group and I said, whoa, wait a minute. This woman is making progress. She did something magnificent. Not only did she move something in the room, but she added a plant, life, and that she was to be congratulated. So we have to be aware of that, either when we're going through the grief process or somebody that we love is going through it. That when we see that we've made progress or they've made progress, to acknowledge that. We find that during this period of reorganization, there's something in us that maybe doesn't want to do that. That we don't want to reinvest in relationships, or we don't want to have another child, or we don't want to find the perfect place to live. And that is natural because of the fear. If I do this and lose this too, then what will happen to me? How will I be able to deal? And it's something that we need to address not only for ourselves, but also if we're supporting other people going through this. A really story that I will never forget. I was in Vancouver and there was a volunteer there supporting a person with cancer. And he was in the last stages, so he was about to die, and everybody at the center knew that. And so I received a phone call from this volunteer, and she said to me, I have some news, some shocking news. And I thought, what can be shocking? We expected him to die. And she said, my husband just died. And I said, what? You mean Mr. So-and-so just died? And she said, no, my husband just died. As it turned out, they were eating lunch together, and he went outside to repair something in the garage. A overhead beam, fell on his head, and he instantly died. So why am I sharing this? I think to let you know that life is really precious and that death can be seen as a random event that happens around us. I was so shocked. And afterwards, I started thinking bizarre thoughts like, what if he had stayed at the table and had dessert? What if she'd made a nice dessert? Would he have died? Would the beam have fallen if he hadn't gone out there? Well, we don't know. But we're not God either. Now, this incident and many more will sometimes cause you to see that life after death is really disorganized. It's like an intricate jigsaw puzzle, like the picture that you see. Life becomes very disorganized. We don't know where anything goes. We don't know where we fit into the picture, into the puzzle, and yet we're feeling that we have to put it back together again. And we will put it back together again. And people that you know that are suffering loss will be able to put it back together again, maybe with some help from you or help from other sources. I always like to think of the nursery rhyme, which is an English nursery rhyme about Humpty Dumpty, who is a big egg, and he sits on a wall, and he had a great fall, and he couldn't put himself, nobody could put him back together again. Well, that image stayed with me, and I realized, no, I'm not Humpty Dumpty. I can put myself back together again, and I can help other people put themselves back together again. So this reorganization can be very difficult, especially if it's a shock. My son died it took 3 months. He was diagnosed with chickenpox and then had complications, and he died 3 months later. I at least had a little bit of time to get used to the fact that my son was really seriously ill and that there was nothing that the medical community could do for him, and that he was probably going to die, although I never gave up hope. The person who dies suddenly it makes it very difficult for people around. I had a good friend who died a couple of years ago, and she just died in her garden. It was very, very difficult for me to deal with that. So sudden death especially interrupts your life and routine, although all deaths do in some way. The grieving process depends upon the relationship you had with that person. It could be anybody, a friend, a distant relative. If you had a very, very close relationship, in Italian, simpatico, if you felt that way with that person, the loss would be greater for you, maybe than someone else in the family. For instance, maybe you have a sister and she died, and you suffered greatly from that. But your brother, who had the same sister, was just fine because he didn't have the same relationship. So the relationship you have with a person who dies determines also the amount of grief that you experience. During this time of reorganization, there are things that you can do that could help you. One thing is that you now have free time that you didn't have before. For instance, after the death of Marcus, I didn't have to carpool. I no longer was a soccer coach. I didn't have to take him to certain lessons. I didn't have to help him with homework. I had a block of free time. And it's the same if it's your sister that died. Maybe you had to take care of her for a number of hours a day. There is this free up time, let's say. And you might write down all the things that you no longer have to do, all the activities that you no longer have to do. And then you might think, what possibly could I do to fill this time? What would make me happy? Shall I try something new? What is it that would fill this time, which is now newly available to me? This is something, would you like to travel, for instance? Would you like to have a hobby? What would you do if your life could return to having a sense about it? What would be important for you? This is an exercise where you can also allow your imagination to run wild, which is so good when you're grieving. You just imagine, if my life were perfect from here on, what would it be like? What would my life be like? I think creative activity is very, very healing and very important. I think it's what motivates me to write book after book after book. It occupies my mind, it's helpful to other people, and it's creative. It's a way for me to heal, and also for a way for me to give value to life for myself and for others. I also paint. So any creative activity that you feel drawn to, perhaps this is the time to explore something that before you never had time to do. It doesn't mean that you're happy about having this time, but only that the time is available. And another thing is that you might consider during this period of reorganization, maybe you haven't looked around, you haven't looked at your house, you haven't looked at the pictures that are out or not out. Now, here is a time of reorganizing your environment as well. Some people don't want to see their child's picture or the loved one who has died. They don't want to see a photograph. They put everything away. I've seen other people. I once went to a family's house where they had actually made an altar to their son, and they had put all of his favorite things on the altar, all kinds of photos. And every time the other children in the household passed to go to the kitchen, they went by the altar. Now, to me, that would be not my way of dealing with reorganization, but it seemed to work very well for this particular family. When you are reorganizing, you need to consider the other children, the people in the household, the extended family that might come to visit, and also if you're married or if you have a partner, how does he or she feel about what you're doing? Some people are very, very comforted to have pictures and things around of their children or of their parents that have died, and other people don't want to see any of those things. So you need to discuss that and come to some sort of an agreement or at least a compromise. Maybe you can say, we'll put things away for now, and then let's look at it again in a month or two. So there's several ways to deal with that. One thing that's so important in this period is not to let friends or family decide for you what you should do. So if your mother comes over and says, oh, I can't stand it, you have this picture out, you need to put it away. No, you do what you need to do to heal. And that's sort of a theme through the whole presentation. It may be possible during this time that you feel you have too much time on your hands. And if you feel that way, one of the best things and most healing things that you can do is to give to others, to serve others. And that's why I became a volunteer at the Center for Attitudinal Healing. When I was helping others heal, of course, I was helping myself. And that is principle number 5, that now is the only time there is, and each instant is forgiving. Can also use, we are all teachers and students to one another. Now let us move on to something very important, and that is relationships. When we have a major loss, there is a change and renewing of relationships. Sometimes we might ask ourselves, where have all our relationships gone? Because our educational system doesn't tell us what to do when somebody dies, we simply don't know what to do. So many of your friends may be there for the service, they may be there for the funeral, you may have a house full of guests, you may have lots of food, but then what happens? Everybody goes away. And a lot of people, they don't come back because there's no education. Nobody says anything anywhere about what to do when somebody dies. And so our friends don't call. They don't know what to do. And we don't know what to do. So many of these friends, so-called friends, will just drift away. Luckily, one of my oldest and dearest friends called me after the death of Marcus, and she asked me what I was doing. And I said to her, well, I don't know. I'm doing nothing. My husband is gone. I don't know where he went. Of course, Marcus isn't here. So I'm just here doing nothing. And she said to me, okay, get a suitcase, put these clothes in it. She named what clothes I needed. And get your dog, Phoebe, which was my son's dog. Get in the car and drive directly to me. Well, now, having said, maybe don't listen to your friends, this sounded like the best possible solution for my situation at the moment. And I really felt I needed to do this. So I did what she said, and I went to her house, and her little children were like two little blonde, blue-eyed angels, and they took such good care of me. And it was exactly what I needed. It's like I was wrapped in cotton candy and in love. It was so important to not just stay there because I had no idea what to do. Friends are often very uncomfortable around you. Some of them have children too, and they think if your children died or if your child died, mine can too. And so they might have a tendency to withdraw. On the other hand, you might have a tendency to withdraw and change relationships. I remember very well a friend coming to the door, knocking on the door. I answered it. She said, come on, get dressed, let's go have tea. And I remember thinking, she's inviting me to tea after my child has died. And I just closed the door on her. And later, of course, she kept knocking until finally I let her in. People, parents especially, are often referred to me by other friends and family because, well, I've been through this and I know what it's like, but I don't know how the other person ever feels. So important. I call this sort of the club of parents who've lost a child. That's true. It is a club, and we often measure everything by before the child died and after the child died. And we often measure any loss that we have against the death of our children. That's true. But I can never presume to know what another person feels. And if somebody says to me, oh, I know how you feel, or I know how you felt, no, they don't know. They don't know. Nobody knows except Phoebe how Phoebe feels. And nobody knows except you how you feel. And that's important to point that out in a very nice way, but to point it out. Often love relationships crash and burn after the death of a child. And I read once where 75% of couples end up getting a divorce after a child is just diagnosed with a very serious illness. Not die, but diagnosed. So relationships, primary relationships, a husband, a wife, it's very important to communicate and to look at this couple relationship because we all grieve differently, don't forget. Men often bury themselves in work. They often have business failures after a loss. And women, very often, just bury themselves in the grief. So now you have two different people. One person saying, and that could be the man or the woman, saying, we have to just go on. We have to just keep working and not recognize that this has happened, really. We can't feel it in order to go on and to survive. And the woman, or the other member, it could be also the man, just tumbles completely into grieving. It puts two people at very different levels. And so, what is important during this time would be to be compassionate about how your partner is healing and also to keep the dialogue open as much as possible. And many people run away, they plunge into new relationships, they plunge into new jobs immediately to have that stimulation to not have to think about what has just happened. Communication, communication, communication. It's the way to get through that period. Also, difference in religious beliefs or spiritual beliefs can cause even more division between two people. Maybe it wasn't important before that your partner always went to church and you never did. But now, with this great loss, there is a division there that may actually precipitate a divorce. So let's see, where are we now? My ex-husband told me that he would look into my eyes and he could see the sadness there and knew that he could do nothing about it. So he felt he just had to leave. Well, if you know him, that's probably not the only reason he left, but I will take it as one reason. And can I help it if I have sad eyes? Maybe I had them all along. Who knows? But when a man is unable, or a woman unable, to prevent the death of a child or the death of a loved one, the person often feels powerless. He feels that he must escape from the situation that he did not succeed at, that he was a failure. And so it is a time when many people run. And these differences in grieving cannot be emphasized enough. That you may look at your partner and think, well, she's not grieving. What's going on here? I'm not able to cope at all. And here he is out going to work every day, playing golf, whatever. So communicating with your partner is paramount in order to preserve the relationship. Marriages that are already very fragile or relationships that are very fragile, they often crack. And that is just what happens. And also, you have the changing relationships of the other children in the family circle. So if the eldest child died, now the second child in line will be the eldest child in some way. So the relationships between the children change as well. And this needs to be talked about. Families are not prepared, parents are not prepared to talk to children about death and about how they feel and how the children may feel. So it's very important to have time for that and to discuss with the children, not put down the curtain as my family did. Nowadays, we're more aware of the possible resources that are available in our community that simply weren't available when I was young. And relationships, of course, are always changing. That remember, or believe me, it's a better word, believe me, that when a child dies or someone close dies, poof, that can really accelerate the change. So your child dies or somebody younger than you dies and you're in a bad marriage or in a relationship that's just kind of going along, and you might start to think, well, what if I were to die today? You know, what if I were to die? Is this really what I want to do for the rest of my life? Maybe not. And so that death precipitates fragility in relationships. There's no getting around that. And if you're experiencing problems with communication with your partner, there are some things that you can do, or with family members. I suggest, as much as possible, that you call your friends or you invite them over for tea or for a potluck dinner and attempt to break the barrier of silence, because they're afraid. They don't know what to do and they back away from you. And so if you can, at some point, take the initiative, I think that really helps cement relationships that could remain relationships if you take the initiative, which is quite difficult to do. And I'm not suggesting it's for everyone. Also, it's just a way of, breaking that barrier of silence that's there. breaking that barrier of fear, especially if you're involved in attitudinal healing. You have some really great tools in your hand that maybe your friends don't have. Another thing is to talk to your partner and talk to your children and try to understand what's going on for them in their hearts, in their heads. What are they thinking about? How are they feeling? So important. And if you cannot break the silence, this is the time where therapy comes in handy, or group sharing. I read many books during this period, and that was a big help for me. It might be for you or for somebody that you're supporting. I also really like to talk to parents about, I educate parents around how to deal with the loss of a child in a family where there are other children, how to talk to other children, how to make other children feel valued. I remember when my brother died, I thought, okay, my mother's sad, my brother died, but what about me? I'm this great kid, you know? Why isn't she happy that I'm still left? Well, you know, her grief was so overwhelming, it wasn't a moment for her to express her happiness of having this great child and my brother, who's a fabulous person. After a few weeks or months, you may be led to go back to where the ashes were scattered or where the memorial service took place. And that can be a time to just share whatever it is that you're feeling and other family members might be feeling. An activity during this period, which I found to be invaluable, is to have a friend come over and sit in front of you and listen without giving you advice and without interruption. They're just there to listen. They may nod their head. They may make a little affirmative sound. That they just sit there. You just ask them. You give them directions. I need to have somebody who listens to me without giving me advice, without interrupting me. And then invite that person to do so. You can also, during that sharing time, you can share anything you want to talk about. How many of us really have a friend or a place that we can go and just talk and share and not be interrupted and not be given advice? Pretty rare. Not so rare with people who practice attitudinal healing, who know how to listen, but unless we're taught, normally when somebody speaks, when I'm sharing, what happens? Somebody else is already thinking, what can they say after I stop talking? So this is a way to feel really fully listened to. And you can also ask your friend who's sitting in front of you to do this in complete silence. You talk, they listen. They don't even affirm things. They don't say yes, they don't nod their head, nothing. Just sit there and look at you and listen. Another variation, perhaps with your partner, is to sit and just hold hands and look at each other and send love and communicate on another level. Can be very powerful and can definitely augment the amount of intimacy that you feel with your partner. So I already mentioned that children often feel guilty about the sick child. If a child has been sick for a long time and has gotten all of this attention, so it's important for the parents to give value to their children, to listen to them, to encourage them, to support them, and to reward them for good behavior, for good grades, for whatever it is that they succeed at. And tell them that you love them and how important they are. This is what I wanted to hear when I was a child, and if I had had other children, I surely would have done that for them. Also, you might consider having a family meeting. And there, as we had at the center, we had a heart, which was made out of material, and it was stuffed with, I don't know, cotton or something, this shiny red material. And it was used like a walking stick. The Native Americans have a tradition of making a walking stick, not making the stick, a talking stick, excuse me. I always say walking stick. maybe because I think it would be good to also be able to walk with the stick, but you just take a branch and it can be decorated by the children as a family project. You can add shells, you can add beads, anything you want, feathers. And then you agree that at a family meeting, you use the talking stick or the heart, whatever it is, an object, and the person who's holding it has the right to talk. And everybody else must listen. Nobody can interrupt. Nobody can grab the talking stick to talk. It's an agreement that the family makes. That gives a security to each person, and especially other children, to be able to know that they have now a moment to be listened to. And for children who have parents that are busy doing so many things, very often they don't feel listened to. So that talking stick, is a real wonderful thing to use when having a family meeting. I'm going to look at the time. Yes, I do have time. We have a wonderful, wonderful forgiveness exercise, and I like to think that this is a good time to do it when relationships are changing and evolving, because there is quite often an underlying anger, an underlying blame, or an underlying guilt that a person feels when somebody has died, especially if it's a child, but also in any case, when somebody has died, might feel that we could have done more, our partner could have done more, someone could have helped out a bit more, given another hand, so that all the burden didn't fall on you, or whatever. So very often there is a need to forgive those around us. So I'm going to offer this meditation, which we often did at Attitudinal Healing when we had our big seminars. And I loved it very much. The exercise was very, very healing. So what you do is just take a few deep breaths and know that you won't be interrupted. That means having your phones turned off, which I assume everyone has already done. And then you just imagine that you're standing on the top of a hill, and maybe there's a breeze blowing through your hair. It's a beautiful sunny day, and your feet are touching the grass. And then you look down the hill and you see somebody, and that person is starting to walk up towards you very slowly, very slowly. You don't know who it is at first, and then the person comes and stands right in front of you. You might be surprised who's there, and then again, you might not. And as the person stands in front of you, take the time to look and perhaps recognize that the person has done the best that he or she could do. And tell the person, if it's possible, that you forgive him or her for whatever it was that you thought the person did or did do. And then, if it's possible, you might embrace the person and let that person go. And then you look back down the hill again. There's another person coming up towards you. You don't know who it is at first until the person gets closer and closer. It may even be someone that you didn't know you needed to forgive. And again, if possible, You tell the person that you forgive them for whatever you think they did, or for whatever they actually did. And if you feel like it, you can embrace the person or let them go with a smile. And then again, you look down the hill and you see another person coming towards you. And as the person gets closer, you realize that you are looking at yourself. And all the blame, all the shame, all the anger, everything that you've been holding onto, you can forgive yourself for, if you wish. And also ask for forgiveness for what you think you might have done with anybody who comes up the hill, but especially with yourself. And then embrace yourself. Know that you did the best that you could do. Know that there's no one to blame for whatever happened. And send good feelings and love to all those people that came to share this experience with you. Now I know that that was sort of an abbreviated kind of experience, but you can also repeat it at home and repeat it in your groups, support groups. And you can have as many people as you wish to come up. I once did it, and I don't know, I think I had 30 people that kept coming up and wanting to be forgiven. And so every time I looked down at the bottom of the hill, here was somebody else coming up to be embraced, to be forgiven, and to forgive me, for me to forgive myself for what I thought I did also. So it's a very healing kind of experience, and it's something you can share easily with others, and also that you can do it by yourself. In fact, tonight, I was very surprised about one person who came up. Didn't know I still needed to forgive that person. Here, the principle that I use is number 6, that we can learn to love ourselves and others by forgiving rather than judging. Every time we judge ourselves, we're hurting ourselves. Every time we judge someone else, we're hurting ourselves. So the idea to love ourselves in the healing process, very important. Very important. Okay, we're going to move on now. I'm looking at the time. We're doing very well. Finishing ceremonies, laying memories to rest. Can I really say goodbye? We, unfortunately, in the United States anyway, we are a society without ceremonies. Most couples do not baptize their children these days, so there's no welcoming in a new soul, a new baby, and perhaps the only ceremony left in the United States, other than the ceremony of dying, would be marriage. And that is really too bad. What I'm about to describe is a way to bring humanity and spirit back into the great passage of death and into the grieving period which follows. This is what I call a finishing ceremony, which means I'm ready now to put down grief. I'm ready to mark an ending. It doesn't mean that I will never grieve in the future. It's only a ceremony to mark this, either for myself or with my community or with my friends. This is different than what happens right after somebody dies, where you have a burial or a cremation. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about later on, some months, maybe even some years later, when you want to say, okay, I want to put these memories to rest now. I want to finish with the grieving process. I want to say goodbye to that person that I loved so dearly. It may be as simple as lighting a candle in a church, or it may be just inviting a friend over and remembering wonderful things about this person that you love so much. It doesn't have to be anything formal. What I'm going to describe now is a time of coming together for a finishing ceremony. And it's a very, very simple thing. If you get together family members and friends, you will automatically have a finishing ceremony if you tell them what your goal is, what you're planning to do. So it's a time that can include music, it can include singing, reading of special passages from a book, special poetry, happy memories can be shared at this time, and anything else that you can imagine. Some people put up a big poster board where people can post pictures and positive sayings. All of this is part of a finishing ceremony. The ceremony might go something like this. It might start with somebody singing a song, any song that the person would like to sing, or maybe playing some piece of music. And then you or your partner or somebody can welcome everybody and explain why you've come together. You need to tell people that you are honoring the person who has died. You are honoring your child. And you're attempting to say goodbye now in a more formal way. It can be a time of releasing. There are some very simple exercises that can be done around releasing thoughts or grief. I want to say not grief, blame, things that I want to release around the death of this person. Maybe I feel I was to blame in some way. You can have little pieces of paper and have people write down what they want to release. Maybe they're still grieving. Maybe it's a sadness. Maybe it's the fact that they can't get going with their lives again. Whatever it might be, can be written on paper, and then it can be in some way destroyed. It can either be burned in a fireplace, or you might have a bonfire. And if that's not allowed, you might just put everything in a canister and explain to the people who take part in this ceremony that this will be disposed of in some way. And if you don't have paper and pencil, or if it's not practical to have a fire, you may also just have people think in their heads. They can release at this time any negativity that they're thinking or that they're feeling or what is still in their hearts, and that they are holding back from moving on with their lives. So whatever it is, it can be a thought. And then you can guide people to take this thought and put it in the basket of a hot air balloon, for instance. And then you can also help them visualize this hot air balloon just drifting up into the sky, into infinity, and going on, releasing. Very practical, very simple way to help people and to help yourself release negative feelings, guilt thoughts, etc. Equally important at the end of the ceremony is to leave people with a positive feeling, not just letting go, but also you might ask each person what they learned from your child or from the person that has died. They might state in one word a quality that your child had. You might ask them to share a wish for the person that has died or a wish for that person's family. And then you may want to end with a meditation or a prayer, closing music, a song. So it's a very, fairly simple thing to organize. And of course, don't forget food. Ask everybody to bring food, because when people are dealing with strong emotions, they like to eat. Now, when do you know it's time to do this? Well, I knew because I used to dream about Marcus having an illness but not dying. And then I would wake up in the morning and I would have those jumping tears that would come out of my eyes when I realized that he was dead. And I use the word dead because the body died. The body is dead. The being, the essence of his being, lives on forever as love. I don't need to use the word passed over, passed on, which seems to be in vogue these days. So instead of the disturbing thoughts that I had about my son, one day I was dreaming and he came to me and he apparently had the flu, but in the dream he told me that he had died. And then I knew that his death had gone to the deepest level of my being and that I was ready to let go and have one of these finishing ceremonies. There's also many other ways to have finishing ceremonies. Meditations that you might find on the internet are very helpful. I have written a meditation, which is in my book. I'm not sharing that tonight because time is passing by so rapidly. The principle that I used in this period was that we can let go of the past and the future. And I always think if God wanted us to look behind us, he would have given us a head that could turn 360 degrees. But what do we have? We have a head that looks in front of us and can look to the sides, but can never look back without turning the entire body backwards. Next, we're going to talk about something that rarely is talked about, and that is anniversary reactions. What to expect in the future. Will the pain ever go away? Now, we're all used to anniversaries, our birthday, wedding anniversary, and in general, anniversaries mean what? They mean celebration. But in this case, that's not what I'm talking about. There's another kind of anniversary, and that is the death day of your loved one. Now, there's the actual death day of the loved one, but there's also what I call a trigger day. For instance, Marcus died on June 20th, this Saturday before Father's Day. So maybe the date will trigger me to have an anniversary reaction, or it might be the Saturday before Father's Day when I really start to think about his death once again. This anniversary reaction, like any anniversary, occurs once a year. It may be strong. You may not experience it at all. But I think that it's important to at least be aware of it. And many grief therapists are not aware of it. They don't help people prepare for this time that could occur. It's something that is not talked about a lot. And a good example is one day I walked into the center, and here was this staff member who was dealing in the 80s and the late 80s with people dying from AIDS, and so many people were dying. And that day I went into work, and she looked at me. She had a very long, sad face. And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know. I'm just feeling kind of down today." And I thought, aha, anniversary reaction. And I said to her, what happened a year ago? And then she says, "Oh, yes, my best friend died." And even she, whom I consider to be a professional person, she was a facilitator in the AIDS group, she had forgotten about anniversary reactions. So you can have all sorts of things happen around this date. You might feel sad for no reason. You think for no reason. You might try to end relationships. I know a woman who called me and said, "My relationship is over." She was having a good relationship with a man. And I said to her, "Why?" And she said, "I don't know. I got up this morning and the relationship is just over. I don't want to deal with him anymore." And I was wise enough to say, well, what happened a year ago or 2 years ago? What happened to you on this date? And then she remembered that her mother had died or somebody close had died. And she was acting irrationally, which is something that can very often happen during this reaction of an anniversary, the death of somebody that you love. It may be strong one year and not so strong the next. For instance, this year, June 20th came, June 20th went. I had no reaction. But another year, I may be led back to those feelings that I had at the time of his death. And it causes you to re-experience this event and also the feelings that you had in the years that came afterwards. So for me, I have to plan ahead. I plan ahead for this day that's coming. I might want to be with some people that I love. I might want to do an activity, something really fun. One year I went to an island with a friend, a very dear friend. We rode a boat over. We had a picnic. Another year, 6 years after his death, I had tickets to the Russian ballet, and I was very excited to go. It turned out a woman that I had been supporting had died 3 weeks before, and her family planned the memorial service on that day at the center where I was directing the center. And here I had these tickets, or this ticket, and I really wanted to go see the ballet. I talked to the parents, and the parents encouraged me to go. They said, Lila would love it that you carried out with your plans. And I did go, and it was Swan Lake. And when the swan was on stage dying, I just felt so strongly that Lila was there and was saying to me, thank you. Thank you for taking care of yourself, and thank you for celebrating my life. At that time, I also wrote a very long poem, which I'm not going to share today. But it does always help me to write about these situations. Some of the things you might consider doing on the anniversary date would be, first of all, I always plan ahead. And then you might want to schedule a therapy session. You might want to reorganize things in your closet or in your desk. I love to reorganize things. When I'm disturbed, that's one of the first things I do. Reorganize. It makes me feel as if I have control over something, even though I don't have control over the anniversary reaction. I might spend time in nature. I might try something new. In other words, sometimes it helps me to be distracted on that date. For other people, they might choose to go to church, to the synagogue. They might plan a special gathering of people and have a meal together or even have a ritual together. You might want to spend time alone, meditating, praying, or just sleeping. That doesn't work for me, but it might work for you. Sometimes calling somebody special or volunteering to help somebody, that works very well for me on that day, to have a volunteer opportunity. Or to create a spa atmosphere in your home, to take a lovely bath with bubble bath and pamper yourself, to go to a special event like I went to, spending time with somebody that you love. It wasn't a time for me to be alone, so I always spent time with somebody that I loved. Some people like to look at old photographs and old videos of their loved ones. I don't. Some people do. Some people like to be very physical and play tennis or another sport. Sometimes people have a remembrance ceremony on that day, which is a very lovely idea, maybe just lighting a candle. Most important thing is to be gentle with yourself, as I've said all through this presentation. Be gentle with yourself and do whatever is right for you. An idea that I used for many years, I created a memory notebook. And in that notebook, on the anniversary of the death of Marcus, I wrote down my feelings. I wrote down memories. I sometimes wrote a letter to him. I would paste things in the book that helped me get through this period. My book happened to be quite large with blank pages, which I liked very much because I could draw. I could put in articles that had helped me during the year. And at the end, I always wrote something about how thankful I was that he had come to Earth and that he had been there for me. First year, what I did was write about the bar exam, the fact that I passed the exam under these circumstances, and I congratulated myself, and I put it in my memory book. Remember one thing, though. There's no use asking the why question. Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to my child? I just stop. I don't torment myself with that type of an unanswerable question. I just don't pose it, ever. And if I find myself thinking, why when I was such a good mother and a good wife? Why did this happen? No, I don't go there. It doesn't do me any good. And it probably doesn't do you any good. So again, I use that number 10, that I can focus on the whole of life instead of its fragments. Now the last thing that I want to talk about is beginning again and moving on. How can we live fully after a loss? One thing is, it's a decision that we make. We decide, okay, this has happened to me. Do I want to go on living a sad life filled with regret? Or do I want to have a happy life filled with love and filled with fun and happiness? I always have that choice to leave behind the sadness or to carry it with me. I choose to leave it behind and to carry the sweet memories that I have of that incredible child with me. It's a choice. I became known as the woman whose child had died, woman whose son had died. I was introduced that way until one day I said, oh no, I'm much more than that. I'm much more than a woman whose child has died. I'm somebody without that child, and I have a right to be somebody. So I began to really live my new identity and to value it. And this reminds me of when I was in law school after a few months after my child's death. A law professor who was very, very strict and very difficult, his course, I was in his course with 10 other students in a seminar. And every time he asked me a question, everybody else answered for me. Very unusual for law students because of the competition involved. And one day he said, I'm going to ask Phoebe a question, and no one else will answer but Phoebe. He passed me the talking stick, in a way. And so I answered, and he grilled me for 20 minutes. And I kept answering him. And he said, the reason I did this is to see if Phoebe could do it. Because one day she may be representing somebody in court whose life depends on it. Afterwards, I thanked him for that. He stopped treating me like a fragile being and treated me like somebody normal. An acquaintance of mine, Bill Thetford, who was responsible for the Course in Miracles, along with Helen Chuckman, said that we have to have courage to leave memories behind us. And he created 2 words, which he calls selective amnesia. And I just love that. Because with selective amnesia, I can forget everything that I want to forget and only remember the good times and the love shared. And that was his idea. And it's a great concept that has served me well. So we all have choices how we're going to deal with things. Are we going to frame them in a way of sadness, or frame them in a way to be grateful for what we had and move on? I remember that there was a woman at the Center for Attitudinal Healing who forgave the murderer of her son because it was making her sick on all levels. And I said, if she can forgive the murderer of her son, I can certainly move on with my life. There is a moment that comes where we want to reinvest in life. And it does take courage, but we all have that force within ourselves to take our lives and make something beautiful of it. I remember that my ex-husband gave me a lithograph from Cahill Gibran that said that our children are not our children. that they come through us, but they don't belong to us. And I never forgot that. In fact, when we think about it, not only do our children not belong to us, but nobody belongs to us. We can possess no one. And there's no certainty in life and no trust in another person that can endure forever. Things always end, things always change, but yet we're safe because we exist. And we can fill ourselves with love, we can fill ourselves with hope and courage. There are many sad things that can happen in life and that have happened to me and happened to you, but we all have our own pasts, and we can decide what is valuable, because the world can be seen as a friendly place filled with love and safety, and we can see that we are safe everywhere because we are much more than just our bodies. So we can frame things in a way. Every moment of every day, I can choose how I wish to look at things, how I wish to perceive circumstances. I can eliminate things that don't serve me anymore, beliefs that don't serve me anymore, religions that don't serve me anymore. And I can find joy and I can find laughter again by being in the present moment, because it is there that we live and it's there that we can experience joy. It's not something that will come tomorrow. It's something that's here right now. So I say, if you're eating ice cream, enjoy it. And also take a chance. Love somebody again. Maybe get a dog if you're not ready to actually love a person. I spent many years not allowing live plants into my house because I didn't want to watch them die. But now I have a garden here. Little garden, little window garden, but I have a garden. And the best thing that any of us can do is, of course, help one another get through these difficult times that we all face from time to time. Keep positive thoughts. And last but not least, be thankful for all that you have. Be thankful for all that you are. And be thankful for all that there is in life. And as Einstein said, that we can live our lives as if everything is a miracle, or we can live our lives as if nothing is a miracle. And Einstein, being the wise, intelligent man he is or was, decided that he chose to live life as if everything was a miracle. So I do hope that this has been very helpful for you. I again present you with the principles. And now we have some moments. If there are any questions somebody would like to pose, I am open to do my best to help answer them. Any questions?
Kate? Yeah, Kate, is your microphone on?
I see something came
So,
on
Kate, we
for
can't hear
someone.
you. If you can click your green your
Tricia,
microphone
I'm not sure
icon
how we do this part.
at the top of your
I
screen
see a hand go up.
and
Do I click?
adjust the microphone volume. Can see if we can hear you. In the meantime, let's see. There were Moses had a couple of questions. I'll go back and yeah. So I'm not sure if I understand this question correctly, but he says, if there is someone you have helped through a difficult situation and then later he or she deserts you in your problems,
Thank you
can you
so much,
forgive
because
him?
I'm not used to all the organizing that needs to be done around this.
And assure him there is bonds of love between you, but still go back to another. Yeah, it's not clear. Let's see. So I think he's talking about if someone has harmed you or like not paid you back for a loan or something, and then
Is that
you lose that relationship. I think he typed us when you were talking about relationships. Um, how can you go back and create a good relationship with somebody who hasn't died, but they've left your life under difficult situations? That's what it sounds like to me. Moses, if you want to clarify that somehow so that we can make sure we understand your original question, please do that. But
um, okay? So it's somebody who has done something to him. He perceives that,
yeah, it
and
seems,
that then he's lost this relationship. Is that what I'm to understand? Okay. Thought it might have something to do with if I support somebody and then I have a problem and they don't support me back, how do I forgive them for that? But what I see, if that's the question, what I see is what I give to another is not given in the with the idea or the expectation that that person will be there for me later on. I give from my
yeah, I
heart
don't, I
out of my
don't either.
intuitive desire or out of
Oh,
my
I,
necessity to share love with that person. And then if the person
no, he's still there.
is there for me later
He's
on,
on
that's wonderful. And if the
Senfuma
person
is
isn't
his
there,
other
that
name.
doesn't diminish the love and the relationship that I
Um,
shared with him or her.
so
I don't know
let
if
me
that
read
was the
some of these
question
other
because
ones to
I
you.
don't see
Um,
anything
so
coming up.
Paul said, "Thank you very much.
I
What a
don't even know if
lovely and
Moses is.
lively refresher
I
of
think
your
he's not
book."
online. Yeah, okay,
Kate
well, we answered a question that
Kate
somebody
was
wasn't online
trying
for,
to
but that's okay.
communicate, but for
Maybe it
some
helps
reason
somebody
her
else.
um,
Oh,
microphone isn't working. So she
oh,
just says,
okay.
"Just wanted to say that this has been a most fascinating presentation. The details, the understanding,
Okay.
the love, beautiful process. I'm definitely going to listen to the recording again and make
Thank
more
you.
notes. Thank you so much." Okay, Zena um, says, "Hi, Phoebe. Wonderful. Love it. I'd also like to suggest uh, induced after-death communication, which is a new form of psychology that one doctor used for Vietnam vets and is now being
You're very,
introduced to
very
the
welcome.
public." So, Zena, I don't know if you're able to turn on your microphone, but if you are, um, you might want to say more about that. That looks like she's typing. Yeah, she says she doesn't have a mic, but she says it's under the EMDR umbrella. The eye focusing. You know that. Yeah. um,
I have
I
not
think
heard about
it's
this,
a
Zena,
technique that has to do with rapid eye movement. Okay.
but maybe there are some key words that we
Thank
could
you, Zena.
easily look up on the internet later. I would be interested. Okay, I've been out of the United States too long. What is EMDR? Oh, I know about that. Okay, okay. Thank you very much. Any suggestions and anything that anyone can
Hmm.
add is most welcome. I can only talk from my experience and the experience of people around me, things that they've shared that have helped them. And I tried to combine them all in this book as much as possible to give people
Yeah.
choices, give people ideas of
Yes,
things that they
when
might
it's the
try
right time.
to help them get through and to move on. I love what Bill Thetford said, though, about selective
So,
amnesia.
Phoebe, there's
That helps
another
me so much. Forget the bad, forget
comment by
the
Moses and
pain,
Fuma. He
and
says,
just keep the love and
the
put that in your pocket and
people
walk on.
here have adopted
I
a
love that.
slogan, no
Of course,
situation is
not right away,
permanent.
but
Can we
this
fit
happened for
that
me, and it can
slogan
happen for
into the
others as
12
well.
principles?
The right time. Until then, forget it. I love that idea. I love that idea. How can we fit that into the current 12 principles? Because we don't add any principles or take away any. These have been here since, what, 1975? But let's just look. No situation is permanent could very easily be a sub principle under now is the only time there is, to let us know that whatever's happening is happening in the moment. And I often say to people, this is what's happening for me in this
Yes,
moment.
that
And then in this
concept
moment,
is also
acknowledging that
quite
nothing is
common
permanent.
in
Maybe
Asian
that would be a
cultures where
place that it could
Buddhism
be put. And also,
is familiar to a lot
whatever
of
works,
people.
and if
The
that works
whole
and
concept of
it's something that
impermanence,
works well in
everything
your
is
culture,
changing all the
why not
time.
just add it on when you're training people and sharing and in groups? Yeah. Very nice. Very nice.
Yes, yes, that is. It's seen from all cultures, all traditions are know that truth.
Yes. And whether we are Buddhist or whatever, it's just the truth, isn't it? Life is changing all the time. Everything is impermanent. Yeah, right. And I just love it when, especially women, will come to me for a private session and they will ask me about the relationship, the new relationship. They say, "Is this going to last forever?" And I always answer, "No, no. It's absolutely 100% sure any relationship you have will not last forever because it will end. Somebody will leave, you will leave, somebody will die. The body, the relationship between two
So
bodies,
Phoebe,
doesn't last
there's
forever.
another
And that's the way
question
it
from
goes.
Kate.
But everything else, the
Did your
love that we share, that
understanding
lasts forever.
develop as a result of
But when they're
attitudinal
asking, what they
healing
really want to know is,
principles,
will
or
this
did you
man be
find
my
that
man? Will he
attitudinal
stand by
healing
me?
principles
No, I
fitted
don't think
your
so.
way
Not
of
forever.
dealing with
You know,
life?
and people are pretty shocked by that. But as you say, everything changes all the time. Well, anything else? Oh, both. Both. I would say there were some principles, for instance, we're all students and teachers to each other, and some of the other principles were new to me. The concepts were new to me and very, very helpful, but I hadn't really thought about them consciously. Others, knowing that we existed and that we will always exist beyond the body, that was something that I was very familiar with. Maybe I didn't call it love, but I knew at an early age that we never died somehow. So both. Yeah. Some principles just fit in right with what I was thinking and feeling, and some principles I said, "Oh, I hadn't thought of that." You know, I always thought there was a teacher and there was a
And
student, and then
Moses
I realized,
responded when
oh,
you were
that's not
answering his
how it
question
is.
earlier.
And
He said thank you. He
the
did
principle
get
about
the
focusing on the whole
message
of
that
life,
you were conveying,
totally new
and
idea for
Kate
me.
just said thanks too.
When I was in a problem or had something that was bothering me, I just, like most people, stayed right there and my head just turned and turned and turned to find the solution. Didn't look at the rest of my life consciously. Yeah. So both.
And
You're very welcome. And I'm surely not the expert in this field, although I have had many, many, many people die around me, close friends and family members. So I think that I was in a way born for this for this teaching also. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? I
sure.
think not. So we're moving. We have 5 minutes, I guess. Should I put up the principles in case somebody doesn't have them? And you can always get a copy of the principles from either attitudinalhealinginternational.org or on the internet. Just type in principles of attitudinal healing and it's just everywhere. Yeah. So I move then to the last slide, Trish. It's just to show you a cover of the book. And the book is available on Amazon, as are all 20 books that I've written. There's my email address, my website, which is not really up to date, but it's there. There's 8 of my books have been translated into French. And I also teach in French. So if you want to write to me in French, you're very welcome, or in Italian, or in English. I can write back. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining me in this evening presentation, and especially to Trish, who is just the most
Thank you,
magnificent being
Phoebe.
going
Thank you,
around the world,
everyone.
spreading
It's
attitudinal
always
healing
delightful to be
and
with
doing a
you, Phoebe. I
magnificent
love
job.
that I got to
And let
see
us
you
all
while
keep
you're
Trish
speaking
and her
this
family
time.
in our prayers
And
tonight, because
the
tomorrow and in
presentation
the
was
days to come,
really
the
beautiful
big
for
island
me.
of Hawaii, as
You
I
know,
understand from
I like a lot
Trish,
of
is
you have had loss
expecting a
in my
major
life, and
hurricane.
it's always
So
wonderful
thank
to
you and be safe,
remember
Trish.
how the
And
principles
thank you to
can
all of you.
support the healing, just moment by moment. So, it looks like Linda is typing something, but I don't see it yet. So if it pops up, I will read it to you. Um, But in the meantime, just want to thank all of you for participating. You can always, of course, contact Phoebe at her email address or contact her through me at Attitudinal Healing International.
Yes.
And just want to remind you that every month, on the third Tuesday of the month, a different attitudinal healing person gives a presentation on this website.
Okay.
So we'd be happy to have you join us for any other ones. I will be sending out to all of you a recording of this presentation. So if you weren't able to participate in the whole thing, or even if you were, you can listen to it as many times as you want. So again, Phoebe, thank you. It's wonderful to be with you, and I hope to see you again very soon. I hope you'll come back and do another presentation now that you've broken the ice. Yeah. Bye. I'm just